And there's so many different factors that you can't blame hiring managers. You can't blame the business. They're busy. They've got a job to do. They're not out there talking to candidates in the market. They don't know what skills are available. They're not in tune with the demands and the competitive landscape on all of this. They're just focusing on what they're trying to solve.
Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here.
Hey everyone, welcome to We're Only Human. I'm Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm really glad to be here with you and glad to be here with one of my good friends, James Galvin. He's over at Starcircle. And as you'll hear in just a minute, he has an incredible accent. It's going to bring some class and culture to the episode that I usually don't bring. So James, all kidding aside, I'm glad that you're here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks very much, Ben. I always thought you were the guy with the great accent, but I'll take what I can get. So yeah, thanks very much for having me. I'll never turn down an opportunity to rattle on about hiring tech anyway.
Oh, goodness. Hey, anyone that knows me knows that of all the things that I could be talking about within the bigger bubble of HR, hiring, talent acquisition, strategy, technology, all those kind of things really get me excited. And I'm trying to very carefully rein in my pace because I'll take off and no one will understand anything I'm saying because I'm too pumped up about it. So before we get into some of that fun conversation about some of the things that you're seeing in the market, some of the things that you're working with companies on and how you're seeing them excel or maybe fall behind a little bit, we'll talk about those and other things today. Would you take a minute and tell the audience more about who you are and what you do, please?
Absolutely. So my name is James Galvin. I'm the founder of Starcircle. This was originally known as Vsauce. I'm a tech guy from Cork in Ireland. I spent about the past 10 to 15 years floating between the US and Asia before returning back to Ireland during the pandemic. So my focus is really about technology and scalable, proactive, data-driven talent acquisition.
I get excited about that. One of my favorite episodes of the last year or so was an episode that really dove into being data-driven, how TA feeds the business growth, and especially for fast-growing organizations, that can make or break your ability to build the product, serve the customer, all those kind of things. And if your hiring pipeline is not moving quickly enough or it's too disorganized, too disjointed, it's going to cost you something at some point. So I get excited with those pieces of it for sure. So excited that you're here. Just to kick us off, let's open with a big thing that's on a lot of people's minds right now. We've seen this roller coaster of talent acquisition in the last couple of years. It was like you couldn't find a person. Some industries have been laying off. It's all over the place. People are holding their breath around elections and economies, all that stuff. What do you think sets those companies apart and all of those things that not just survive, but really thrive during that kind of environment?
I think if we were to boil it down to two words or two concepts, is your dynamic and alignment within the organization. So, what it means to be dynamic, well, that's a long story. What it means to be aligned is another long story. But the organizations that can make sense of all the volatility in the market and the changes we've seen over the last couple of years, they're measuring things. They're measuring things internally. They're measuring things externally. They have a very clear view of the demand internally at their organization. They have this alignment throughout their organization. We know who we need to hire. We know the numbers we need to hire. We know what good looks like. They have a clear view of the talent. And they maintain then also a clear view of the external supply there in the market. So what we need internally, does it actually exist out there? How are things changing? Is our compensation in line? And you're continuously reconciling this. So what you need in the business versus what exists externally. And then your capability follows. So your capability has to match that. So some of the issues that arise is a result of a misalignment between the demand needs of the organization, the supply in the market, and then the capability that you have internally. And we've seen, for example, companies overextending, overhiring, building teams above and beyond what was needed to support the longer term demand in the organization, where the demand might be short lived, but the capability that you build is long term capability. And now suddenly you find yourself out of sync. So organizations that are a little bit more in tune, I think, number one, they measure these things, they stay on top of it. Number two, when in doubt, you take more of a blended approach. So you try to stay lean internally and you have some kind of flexible capability that allows you to scale up and down when you have those temporary surges in need.
I wanted to ask you, because you shared something a second ago that stuck with me a little bit. You talked about some of this approach that some companies take that's a little bit more static. It's not dynamic. Okay. So we're not looking at what we have internally. We're not planning ahead and aligning with the business on what they're going to need before it happens. Before the rec drops on our desk, we have to know what's coming. Any thoughts on how we can go as a TA function? Let's say I'm working in an organization right now, somebody listening out there, probably that you can identify with this. But I'm working for a company that's very reactive. Things just show up and we feel like we're always just on our heels trying to respond to things. How do you go from reactive to more proactive, being aligned? You touched on a couple of things there, I think, but I want you to spell those out if you don't mind, because I think that's going to help people listening in that are trying to figure out how to get on that path.
Yeah, and every organization is different. And ideal world is that you have this long-term demand planning process where you're not just working with the hiring managers, but the talent acquisition is part of that process as a business partner to understand where things are going in the organization, the numbers that you're going to need, and that can be ready for it then by with market maps, with pipelining, with the clear understanding of not only the availability of the skills in the market that you need, but also the hireability. So most of the time, to be honest, in my experience, talent acquisition is not even really consulted in this planning process. The headcount needs comes up, the job descriptions come up, and then they get handed over to TA. Here you go. We need 50 data scientists in Palo Alto. And TA is like, well, technically they're out there. It's not going to be that easy to hire them, at least not for us and for the comp that we're offering. And so probing, validating in advance, and taking more of an iterative approach. So before we lock in those job recs, before we lock in this plan, making sure that TA is in the loop, has a say in the matter, will be able to deliver. And here's the dynamic part. When there are bottlenecks, so that we can adapt. So the earlier we can get into that negotiation, are you sure we need 50 data scientists, or can we mix and match 20 data scientists and 30 data analysts, because that might be something that we can deliver. So getting into that process earlier on, TA having a more active role, having a seat at the table as part of these discussions, rather than something that's tacked on at the end. Okay, we've got our plan, now go and make it happen, which can result in problems when it comes to expectations being aligned and then the delivery coming through afterwards.
Excellent. Yeah, I was excited to touch on that a little bit, because I feel like that's one of the things that a lot of us deal with is we're always, as you said, we're on the backside of this. They expect us to deliver, but they're not putting us into the conversation or allowing us in the conversation when we're planning this in advance to say, hey, you know what, that's actually possible. We're going to need an extra 30 days lead time to make that happen just because of this unique circumstance in the marketplace. They treat every single requisition like it's the same one. I need you to hire this admin and this unique specialty data scientist like they're the same kind of thing, and they're completely different worlds for anyone who's actually done hiring before. So really quickly, I was going to tap on a couple of data points that you'll find interesting. I think the audience will appreciate. I posted on this recently on LinkedIn, but I shared some of our data around companies. We looked at organizations in our most recent TA data that said we actually hit right on our hiring target for last year. I looked at what things set those companies apart from everybody that's like, we way overshot, or we didn't plan for enough, and we had that hair on fire scramble trying to figure out how to hire enough people last minute to get that fixed. And so a couple of things that stood out from that group, they're more percent less likely to have multiple systems where they're trying to keep up with things, right? They have one system, one data source, one source of truth for when they're making decisions. They're not trying to pull this from all these places. They're less likely to be using ad hoc metrics. So you said that from the very beginning, James. You said data-driven hiring. Come back to that over and over again. And some of the examples you've given already have tied back into that. They're not doing this sort of ad hoc when they feel like it or when someone asks, but this is a part of who they are every day. And then they're more likely to be using quality of hire as a key metric for proving the value of TA back to the business. Not just look how quickly we did this, because if we're quick and we're wrong, it doesn't matter. We're doing the wrong things. So a couple of things that tie into that too. You shared some good examples, some good points, I think, that everyone needs to think about and keep in mind, but there's some data points too to wrap into that. But I touched on quality of hire there. I was using that as sort of a segue into the next question I was going to ask you. So our research, we look at that, shows that companies are leaning into metrics like quality of hire. And I'd love to know why you think that is. You're sitting there working with a lot of different organizations that are hiring some unique types of roles. It's very hard to fill positions. Why do you think they're leaning on quality of hire? And how are you supporting that with the companies you're working with?
Yeah, well, for a number of years, that's particularly after COVID, a couple of years, that crazy phase where everybody's hair was on fire. You just needed to get bodies in. We just needed to make hires. We needed to fill quotas. Since then, there's been a lot more sobering in talent acquisition, and people are starting to focus now actually on getting the right hires in, not just any hires. And it's critical. It's great because we're starting to think more about the end goal of talent acquisition. It's not to get bums and seats. It's not to fill your quota, but it's about to improve the performance of the organization to achieve business goals, business objectives. And there's more often than not this disconnect that the business objectives actually aren't cascaded down to that level. There's this TA is siloed to a certain extent. So it's great. And the focus on better hiring is key. But when we talk about quality of hire, it's different from one company to another. And I'm not really sure if anybody has a great definition for it. Some people look at retention and some people look at satisfaction metrics through the hiring process and things like this. But really, quality of hire is about being able to achieve those business objectives. And so it's tied to the long-term performance of the candidates, which is, I mean, the data's there. It's in your HRIS somewhere. It's in your performance management system, but it's disconnected from the hiring process, sadly. And this has been the case forever. And something I was really interested in, well, always have been and still am, is about criterion validity within the hiring and HR process. The things that we look for during the hiring process, are these the right things? And well, the only way to validate that is look at long-term performance and see if they're correlated. And anytime companies actually, you hear about companies who actually do this kind of analysis, there's always surprises in there. So when we talk about quality of hire, is retention even the right way to measure that? Are you retaining the right people? Are you hiring the right people? Are you retaining the right people? So it's challenging to pinpoint, but the important thing is trying to focus on better hires, on better hiring. And that's not a simple question, and it's not answered by a simple metric, but it's throughout the process of hiring, throughout the process of performance, retention, and reconciling these things and having that feedback loop then to continuously validate, are we selecting for the right things? Are we measuring performance in the right way? Are we achieving our business objectives and not losing sight of why this all matters? And then taking those data and trying to act upon it. So what we do to focus on better hires rather than just any hires, but firstly is really digging in to understand the need. And we talked about the need to be dynamic. We talked about the rigid approach that a lot of companies take. Here's my job descriptions. Now TA, go and get me my candidates. And that's not always going to result in the best hires. And once you start digging in, a lot of the time the job description is an artifact used by HR internally in the organization. It's needed to be compliant. I mean, with the law and everything, you need to have this job description. But that's not a blueprint for how to perform your search or your selection necessarily. There's layers of abstraction above and beyond the job description. And there's methods for searching and finding talent that don't necessarily need to be hinged on the job description. So, for example, if you're more proactive, building out generic pipelines that can help you to get to know the talent market, then you're not hiring for a specific job description. But once you've got to know the people, then it makes it easier to match them up against job descriptions when they do arise. So the first thing that I've always found is that if you are anchored on your search and your hiring is anchored on a job description that is not optimal for the business need you're trying to fulfill, it can be not optimal in so many different ways. A lot of the time, most of the time, it's just too prescriptive. It's too narrow. It might be outdated. Might have been copy pasted a few times. People don't really want to touch this big old clunky job description because then you've got to do a whole load of work. That's really going to limit your hiring options. So whereas a more dynamic approach would be, okay, these are the job descriptions that we're going to be hiring. Now let's get ahead of that and look at the people that we want to meet and look at the people that we want to talk to based on the reality then of the market, based on the people that you're talking to the market, the skills that you're seeing. You can overcome those bottlenecks and you can start to take a more dynamic approach to filling the gaps in the organization. And hopefully then, to a certain extent, the job descriptions will evolve. New job descriptions will emerge based on what you're seeing. You won't be blindsided by new technologies appearing in the market, by new skills, which happens from time to time. It's happening at the moment. So it leads to this more dynamic organization. So better hiring, it's what it's all about, really. Everything it's all about. Better hiring, leading to business objectives being achieved, better business performance, and making sure that we have this feedback loop throughout TA through to hiring performance and that we're not siloed.
I cannot believe, James, that you would recommend that people don't use that 50 bullet points list of things in the job description on their job postings. Come on now. That's one of the biggest problems I see. And I used to make the joke that you can tell, you're talking about how many times that's been copy pasted. Like, look at the file name. If it's final V7, Like that one's been saved over the years so many different ways, changed so many different ways that, it may not even reflect what we're trying to hire for anymore. Maybe it's a different job entirely now. So yeah, there's definitely some challenges with that, need some translation. And I think one of the ties I'm going to make between what you just shared, the quality of hire piece, and some of the things you shared earlier is maybe we as a TA function shouldn't be trying to decide what that looks like in a vacuum. We should be conversing with our business counterparts on what does quality look like in this role? What sort of outcome does this person produce? Because that seems to be what you're getting at there. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many different factors that you can't blame hiring managers. You can't blame the business. They're busy. They've got a job to do. They're not out there talking to candidates in the market. They don't know what skills are available. They're not in tune with the demands and the competitive landscape on all of this. They're just focusing on what they're trying to solve. And they have an approach to solving it, which is, well, it's largely hinged upon what they've been doing for the last 5 years. And the job description that they're going to form is going to be based on the incumbent, and they're not going to have all the answers. But a lot of the time, if TA is not informed, they're not going to be taken seriously either. So it really is critical for a TA to be that business partner, to work with the hiring managers, but it's a two-way street. It's not about understanding what the hiring manager needs alone, but it's also about keeping the hiring manager informed about what the market can deliver, or with a couple of minor tweaks to your approach, can we deliver a better outcome for the organization?
Excellent. I'm picturing this very consultative approach, asking questions, not just telling, but asking questions, trying to lead them almost like a coach down the right path versus you should do this, because when you start pushing, sometimes they'll push back instead of, even if it's the right choice, they'll still push back because you're encroaching on their territory a little bit with their decision making. So, okay. So you've touched on a couple of different really interesting things so far in the conversation. And one of the things that I wanted to come to, like this was the one I was honestly most excited about, is you and the team have put together this hiring friction model. And I'd love for you to share some of the concepts in that with the audience, because I think it sounds really intriguing and it may give them a good framework for how to think through some of the key points in that entire talent acquisition lifecycle and some of the areas where they might could see some improvement.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm really obsessed about this hiring friction model, but not everybody is really interested in getting this stuck into the frameworks. But I know you've got a really tech-savvy listener base here, so happy to oblige. So what we did with this 12 components of hiring friction, we're trying to understand, firstly, hiring talent. A lot of the time, it's seen as this transactional, linear process. And we were often treated as a sourcing provider, which means give me candidates. I just need candidates, give me candidates in. And we were very good at that. We were very good at using all these tricks and Boolean searches to find candidates. But that'll only get you so far if, as we talked about, if the job description itself is part of the problem, or if the hiring process itself is part of the problem. And over the years, the industry has changed a lot. And back in 2007, 2008, when we started this, sourcing was an straightforward transactional task. You go out, here's a job description, go get me candidates. You go onto monster.com and you post it, or you do some search and you get your candidates. And that's what the job entailed. Things have got so much more complex over the years with LinkedIn and with passive talent and with all the changes in the market, that as we discussed, that there's a much more nuanced approach has to be taken in the context of the organization has to be considered. So we started having these conversations. If I give you a list of 100 candidates and the job parameters are too narrow, too restricted, you're going to be missing out on the best candidates anyway. So we want to go beyond that. We want to take a broader view. But if you take a broader view, then is it wasting time? And we said there's always this trade-off, quality versus cost versus speed of hire and all these things. And I said, we need a model to really make sense of this. When we started digging into putting this model, it's a model to describe hiring performance. It started getting more and more holistic. And the 12 components, I'll spend a few minutes to say what they are, but I won't go into detail on any of them unless there's one that you want to dive into. So it starts with demand alignment, as we talked about, understanding the demand of the organization, making sure that the TA, hiring managers are aligned around what we need, what good looks like, what the contingencies are. We move on to consider talent market positioning, how you're positioned in the market, what your employer brand is like, not just in general, but in the context of the type of people that you're going to hire. Are you positioned well enough to hire these guys, or is that the area that we really need to focus in? We move on to talent market understanding. How well does the organization understand the availability of the talent in the market? We look at labor market statistics and compensation. Do the guys exist? Do the skills exist? And really staying in tune with the reality of the external market. The fourth component then is candidate experience, which is high on your list at the moment. I imagine, Ben, it's a really important topic nowadays, because let's say we go out there and we understand the market and we find the best candidates, and they're really elusive because the world is their oyster. There's plenty of people knocking on the door. They've taken the time to engage with your process. You want to make sure that you don't spook them, you don't scare them off, they don't fall through the cracks. If you want to hire the best talent, you got to make sure you have great experience. Then we move on to process and timing, how long it takes to move through each stage of the recruitment process, skills and accountability within the team, talent surfacing and attraction capability. Am I able to search my own ATS? Do we search our own ATS? Are we able to resurface candidates, silver medal candidates? Are we able to bring people in through our career site? We move on to assessment and selection. Are we thoroughly assessing the candidates? Are people falling through the cracks because we're assessing the wrong things? We're missing out, false negatives, or our selection criteria are not optimal, for example. Now we move through last four, we're getting there. Technology enablement. To what extent is technology supporting us in developing a more efficient and effective recruitment process? Data integrity and availability. Is my database searchable? Are the metrics that I need there? Can I pull them up? A lot of the time they're not there. Performance measurement and benchmarking, that is, of the talent acquisition and of the hiring function as a whole. How are we performing? How do we stack up against other companies in the space? What's our time cost of hire like compared to other companies? What are our diversity metrics like? Are we actually informed? And finally, then continuous improvement. Do we have a mechanism for continuously improving our hiring? Do we review these metrics on a holistic basis? So like you said, one dashboard, one source of truth where it all comes together rather than a bunch of siloed teams, each improving their own little area, but maybe not necessarily singing off the same hymn sheet. So those are the 12 components. It's a really powerful framework because sometimes you might scan through. We can say, look, at this company, we know we've got a fantastic candidate experience. We don't need to focus on that. But most of the time, what you'll find is there's a couple of reds in there. This area, we don't do a great job on assessment and selection. We've got to improve that. That's a red. And then there's a bunch of oranges. But what happens is a narrative starts to emerge very quickly. And it gives us a shared vocabulary then to start tackling these issues and to measure then and to create that framework for continuous improvement.
I enjoy that so much. I'm glad one of the last things you said there had nothing to do with the model itself, the 12 points, but you came back to the purpose of something like this is it gets us all on the same page. It creates a common ground, a shared vocabulary with the words you used. And we can talk about this in a way that everyone is on the same page instead of saying, hey, we need to focus on this. And it's something that we haven't defined yet. It's vague and it could encapsulate a bunch of different things. Like our data is not good. Well, that's too vague. We don't know what that means. We don't actually know this thing. Okay, let's go dig into that. So you gave some really good points there. Any issues if I link to the hiring friction model in the show notes?
Oh, no, please do. Yeah.
But whoever's listening out there is like, I want to go a little deeper. I missed one of those points James shared. I'll make sure that link is in the show notes. You can click right over to the page on the Starcircle website, see the model there, and maybe take some time to figure out which ones you could improve on, which ones you might need to shore up a little bit or strengthen if you're going to create the right kind of experience for candidates and the right predictable hiring outcomes that you're ultimately looking for. So excellent. Goodness. James, I've enjoyed this so much. If someone wants to know more about Starcircle, I'll obviously put that link into the show notes for the hiring friction model. But anything else that you'd like to share for a place they can connect or learn more about what you and the team are doing?
Hiring friction is great. Connect to me on LinkedIn, send me an email. I'm really happy to discuss all day long about this stuff. Honestly, anybody who's interested, just connect with me.
Okay, perfect. I'll make sure and get that link in the show notes as well. Hey, I appreciate this so much. Any other data-driven recruiting nerds out there? We're probably just alongside you and me, like so excited about the conversation today, really getting some good ideas on how to go to a more proactive approach there. And I'm going to come back to the two words you talked about earlier. If your organization, your hiring function is not as dynamic as it could be or aligned with the business as the two things that James brought in earlier, then you need to spend a little time working on that. And we gave you some good tools and frameworks to work through that. James, thanks for joining us and for sharing your insights with the audience here.
Thanks a million, Ben. Great to talk.
For sure. To everybody else out there, work on your hiring function, go get business aligned, connect with your candidates, and we'll catch you again next time on We're Only Human.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.